The cup of tea sat steaming on my nightstand, the same delicate china pattern my mother had given me 40 years ago when I got married. Chamomile, my daughter said. To help me sleep better. The roses painted on the porcelain seemed to mock me in the lamplight. Beautiful things hiding ugly truths underneath their pretty facades. I should have known. My hands were shaking as I lifted it to my lips that Tuesday evening in March. Not from age. Though at 67 my fingers weren't as steady as they once were when I used to thread needles by candlelight during power outages. But from something else. Something deep in my gut, some primitive warning system that my body was screaming but my heart refused to hear. The steam carried a scent that should have been soothing, lavender and honey and chamomile flowers, but instead made my stomach clench with inexplicable dread. The bitter taste hit my tongue first. Metallic and sharp, like sucking on pennies or licking rust from an old fence post. But underneath that, something else. Something chemical and wrong that didn't belong in chamomile tea, something that made my throat want to close up in protest. But I drank it anyway because when your only daughter brings you tea with that sweet smile, the same smile she's worn since she was 7 years old, gap-toothed and innocent, building sandcastles and believing in fairy tales, you don't question it. You trust. You love. You drink the poison she's prepared for you with the same careful attention she once used to make mud pies in the backyard and pretend birthday cakes for her dolls. Within an hour my stomach was on fire. Not the gentle burn of spicy food or the dull ache of hunger, but something violent and consuming, like acid eating through my insides, like my own body was attacking itself from within. The room spun like a carnival ride I couldn't get off. The familiar furniture of my bedroom twisting into strange, threatening shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. I remember gripping the edges of my bed, my wedding ring clicking against the wooden frame. The same bed where I'd read bedtime stories to that little girl who was now slowly killing me. The same bed where my husband Robert had died 4 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by love the way death should come. Not like this. Not with malice aforethought and careful planning. How did I get here? The thought cut through the nausea like a knife through tender meat. How does a mother who sacrificed everything, who worked 2 jobs to put her daughter through college, who gave her the down payment for her first house, who taught her to bake cookies and braid hair and trust in the goodness of family, how does that mother end up dying by that same daughter's hand? I collapsed that night. My body seized up like I was being electrocuted from the inside out, every muscle contracting at once, my spine arching off the bathroom floor where I'd crawled to vomit. The paramedics found me convulsing on the cold tiles, foam at the corners of my mouth, my nightgown soaked with sweat and worse things. The doctor said it was food poisoning. Severe but treatable. Sometimes these things happen with age, they said. Digestive systems become more sensitive. They were wrong. It wasn't food poisoning. It was family poisoning. The kind that seeps into your bloodstream slowly over months, disguised as love and care and concern for your well-being. The kind that comes with hugs and thoughtful gestures and all the words a good daughter is supposed to say to her aging mother. My daughter Jennifer was trying to kill me for my inheritance. And she almost succeeded. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Margaret Helen Collins and I am 71 years old now. These hands have lived a full life. The lines on my palms tell stories of decades spent kneading bread at 5 in the morning before my shift at the textile factory, changing diapers when disposable ones were a luxury we couldn't afford, signing permission slips with pens that barely worked, and holding the people I loved through their darkest moments. I have deep grooves around my eyes from squinting at homework under lamplight, helping my children with math problems I'd forgotten how to solve, geometry and algebra that seemed impossible until we worked through them together at the kitchen table. The crow's feet are earned honestly, from laughing at my husband's terrible jokes for 43 years, from smiling through Christmas mornings when money was tight but love was abundant, from crying when Robert died and taking Jennifer's hand at the funeral while we lowered the man we both loved into the ground. My voice carries the weight of someone who has sung lullabies at 3 in the morning when children couldn't sleep, who has delivered hard truths at kitchen tables when easy lies would have been kinder. I remember when disco was new music that scandalized the church ladies, when a phone call meant standing in your kitchen tethered to the wall by a curly cord that never quite reached where you needed to go, when gas cost 60 cents a gallon and we thought that was highway robbery. I've lived through the Kennedy assassination, watched a man walk on the moon on our black and white television, Seen computers go from room-sized monsters to things that fit in your pocket. I've buried both my parents and my husband of 43 years. I know what real loss feels like. The way it sits in your chest like a stone you can never cough up. The way it makes everything taste like ashes for months afterward. The way grief becomes a companion you never wanted but can't quite shake. I thought I understood grief. I thought I'd experienced the worst kind of loss a person could endure. But nothing prepared me for the loss of my daughter while she was still alive. Before this nightmare began, my life was beautifully, predictably ordinary. I lived in the same two-story colonial where I'd raised Jennifer and her older brother Michael, where I'd hosted birthday parties and helped with science projects and waited up nights when they were teenagers driving cars that seemed too fast and dangerous for my babies. Yellow siding that I'd painted myself 3 times over the years, white trim that needed touching up every spring when the winter had been particularly harsh, a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses with equal determination and varying degrees of success. The house sat on Elm Street in a neighborhood where children still rode bicycles without fear and neighbors still waved from their front porches like people had time for such pleasantries. I knew Mrs. Henderson next door had arthritis because I could hear her walking more slowly on her hardwood floors, the careful shuffle of someone whose joints hurt more each year. I knew the Martinezes across the street were expecting their first grandchild because I'd seen them painting the spare bedroom a soft yellow that would work for either a boy or girl. Every morning I'd wake at 6:30, my body trained by decades of factory shifts to rise before the alarm clock, some internal timer that never quite adjusted to retirement. I'd make coffee in the same percolator I'd owned since 1981. The one Robert bought me for my birthday because he was tired of instant coffee and claimed a real pot would make all the difference in the world. I'd sit on my back porch watching the sun paint the sky pink and orange above my neighbor's fence, listening to the world wake up around me, dogs barking their good mornings, cars starting, the distant hum of traffic as people began their daily routines. The quiet hours before the world stirred were mine alone. Time to read mysteries from the library, thick paperbacks with bent corners and coffee stains, to think about grocery lists and doctor appointments and whether I needed to call the plumber about that dripping faucet, to remember Robert's laugh and wonder if I was forgetting the sound of his voice. These were precious moments, stolen from a day that would soon be filled with the comfortable tasks and obligations of a woman living alone but not lonely, independent but not isolated. I was financially comfortable, thanks to my late husband's pension from 37 years at the steel mill and the life insurance policy we'd maintained for decades, scraping together premium payments even when money was so tight we ate beans and rice for a week to make it work. Nothing extravagant, but enough to keep the house, take the occasional bus trip to visit Michael in Oregon, maybe buy a new dress for church or splurge on hardcover books instead of waiting for the paperback editions. More importantly, there would be something meaningful to leave to my children when my time came. A nest egg that represented a lifetime of careful saving, of choosing store brands over name brands, of making do and making last. That money. It's strange how something meant to be a gift of love can become a motive for murder. Jennifer had always been complicated even as a baby. Where her older brother Michael had been content to sleep and eat and gurgle happily at the mobile above his crib, Jennifer demanded constant attention from the moment she entered the world. She was born 3 years after Michael, arriving 2 weeks late as if she was already operating on her own schedule, already determined to do things her way regardless of what anyone else wanted. She would cry if you put her down for even a moment, shriek if you left the room, and somehow manage to wake up the exact instant you tried to take a nap or have a quiet conversation with your husband. The pediatrician assured me this was normal, that some babies were just more spirited than others. She knows what she wants, Dr. Patterson said during one of many visits where I brought her in, convinced something must be wrong. That's not necessarily a bad thing. She'll probably be a leader someday. But it felt like a bad thing when I was surviving on 3 hours of sleep and my marriage was strained to the breaking point. Robert would come home from his shift at the mill, covered in coal dust and bone-tired, only to find me walking the floors with a screaming baby who wouldn't be comforted by anything I tried. Looking back, I wonder if she was training us even then. Teaching us that peace came only when Jennifer was happy, that our comfort mattered less than hers. As she grew older, Jennifer developed an uncanny ability to get what she wanted through a combination of charm, persistence, and manipulation that was almost impressive in its effectiveness. When she was 8, she convinced her grandmother, my mother, to give her a pearl necklace that was supposed to come to me someday, a family heirloom that had been passed down through 3 generations. I found Jennifer in her bedroom that afternoon, carefully placing the pearls in her jewelry box. A small wooden chest my father had made for her birthday, complete with tiny compartments and a ballerina that spun when you opened the lid. "Grandma gave them to me," she said without looking up from her treasure, arranging the pearls next to her collection of penny candy and hair ribbons. "She said I have good taste and that I'll take better care of them. Those were supposed to be mine when she gets older," I said carefully, not wanting to discuss death with a child but needing her to understand the significance of what had happened. "But I'm taking care of them now. Grandma says I'll take better care of them than you would because you're always so busy with work and Michael and Daddy." The words stung more than they should have, partly because there was some truth in them. I was busy, stretched thin between my job at the factory and keeping house and raising 2 children with a husband who worked long hours. But mostly they hurt because of how practiced they sounded, like Jennifer had already thought through exactly what to say if questioned. When I called my mother that evening to ask about the necklace, she seemed surprised by my concern. "Oh, Margaret, don't be selfish. She's just a little girl and she was so sweet about it. She told me all about how she would take special care of them, how she would wear them to church and think about our family history." It just melted my heart. I should have paid attention to that moment. The way Jennifer's eyes lit up when she got what she wanted. The way she tucked the necklace away and never wore it again, never mentioned our family history. It wasn't about the pearls or their sentimental value. It was about the getting, the winning, the ability to take something that belonged to someone else. But she was my daughter and I chose to see her best qualities instead of the warning signs that were already there. She was intelligent, reading chapter books by age 6, solving math problems in her head that I needed paper and pencil for. She was charming, could talk her way into or out of anything with that sweet smile and the way she tilted her head just so when she wanted something. She was beautiful, tall and willowy like my mother's side of the family, with my late husband's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. Teachers loved her because she was articulate and well-behaved in class. Other children followed her around the playground like she was some kind of magnetic force they couldn't resist. In high school, Jennifer seemed to find her stride. She was valedictorian, prom queen, captain of the debate team. She dated the quarterback but broke up with him senior year because, as she told me, "I'm not going to let some boy hold me back from my future. I have plans." I was proud of her ambition then. I admired her independence and determination. Now I wonder if what I mistook for healthy ambition was actually something much darker. A willingness to discard anyone who stood between her and what she wanted. She earned a full scholarship to State University, majoring in business administration with a minor in psychology. "I want to understand how people think," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "How they make decisions, what motivates them. I think it'll help me in business." When she married David right out of college, I thought she'd found her anchor. David was steady and kind, the type of man who brought flowers for no reason and remembered to call his mother every Sunday without being reminded. He was a middle school science teacher with a gentle way about him and a laugh that filled up a room. They had a lovely wedding in our backyard. White roses and string lights, her dress borrowed from a college friend because they were saving every penny for a house. I spent weeks preparing for that wedding, painting the fence, planting extra flowers, learning how to make a 3-tiered cake from a cookbook I checked out from the library and practiced with until I could do it in my sleep. Robert grumbled about the expense and the disruption to his weekend routine, but I could see how proud he was walking Jennifer down our makeshift aisle, how his chest puffed up when people complimented her dress or the decorations or the way the whole thing came together. For the first few years of her marriage, Jennifer seemed genuinely happy. She worked at a marketing firm downtown, commuting 30 minutes each way in a used Honda Civic she'd bought with her own money. David taught his science classes and coached track, coming home with stories about his students and their latest experiments or achievements. They bought a small ranch house with a picket fence that actually was white and a backyard big enough for the children they talked about having someday, maybe a dog to complete the picture. When I visited, I could see how they decorated it together. His books mixed with hers on the shelves, photos from their honeymoon to the Great Smoky Mountains, a vegetable garden they'd planted together with more optimism than skill. But somewhere along the way Jennifer started keeping score. She'd mention casually during our Sunday phone calls how David's parents had helped them with their down payment. How unfair it was that some people inherited family money while others had to work for everything they got. How lucky Michael was that his in-laws were wealthy enough to help him start his business. "It must be nice," she'd say during visits, watching me serve pot roast on the china we only used for special occasions, having parents who can just write a check when you need help. I should have seen the resentment building like storm clouds on a clear day, dark and threatening on the horizon. The truth was, Robert and I had never been wealthy. We lived paycheck to paycheck for most of our marriage, saving what we could but always finding new expenses. Medical bills when I broke my wrist, car repairs that couldn't wait, property taxes that seemed to increase every year without regard for our fixed income. The money Jennifer was thinking about, the inheritance she felt entitled to, didn't exist until after Robert died and the life insurance paid out. Even then, it wasn't the fortune she seemed to imagine, just enough to ensure I could stay in my house and maintain my independence for the rest of my life. But Jennifer's perception of our wealth grew over time, fed by her own financial struggles and what seemed to be an inability to accept that good things required patience and hard work. When her marriage started falling apart, David working long hours to pay for the lifestyle Jennifer wanted, Jennifer spending money they didn't have on clothes and furniture and trips to make herself feel better, she began showing up at my house more often. Always with some reason, some excuse that made her presence seem natural and caring. She was worried about me living alone in such a big house. She thought I looked tired lately, maybe a little confused. Maybe I shouldn't be driving so much anymore, not at my age. "Mom, you're 67, she said one afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I'd made too strong in my nervousness. "Don't you think it's time to start thinking about the future?" I was folding laundry at the same table, matching socks with the same methodical precision I'd used for decades, trying to keep my hands busy so she wouldn't see how they shook slightly when she talked about my future like it was something that needed managing. "What kind of future?" I asked, though part of me already knew where this conversation was heading. "Well, this house is so big for just you. And all these stairs. What if you fell? What if something happened and no one found you for days?" I read an article about elderly people who... "I'm not elderly," I interrupted, though even as I said it, I wondered when the line had been crossed without my noticing. She smiled that sweet smile, the one that had gotten her out of trouble her entire life. "I know, Mom. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, maybe I could move back home for a while. Just until I get back on my feet after the divorce. We could look out for each other." Looking back, that was the moment. The moment I should have said no. I should have seen through the loving concern to the calculation underneath. But she was my daughter and she was hurting, and I had this big house with empty bedrooms that still smelled like childhood dreams and teenage secrets. I believed her when she said it would be temporary. I believed her when she said she just needed time to figure out her next step. I believed her because the alternative, that my own daughter was planning something that would hurt me, was simply unthinkable. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who look like family. Jennifer moved in 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in early October when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air held that crisp promise of winter coming. She arrived with boxes and suitcases and promises that echoed what she'd said before. Temporary, just until she got back on her feet, just until she figured out what came next in her life. She took over my guest room with an efficiency that should have been my first warning. Within hours, she'd hung her college diplomas on the walls next to the participation ribbons from her high school track team, filled the dresser with expensive clothes she could no longer afford, designer suits from her marketing days, silk blouses that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, shoes that had probably never touched a sidewalk. She made herself comfortable in ways that felt both natural and invasive, like water finding its way into every crack and crevice of my carefully organized life. Her coffee mugs appeared in my kitchen cabinets, her magazines stacked up on my coffee table, her phone charger permanently plugged into the outlet by my reading chair. At first, the companionship was genuinely welcome. The house had felt so empty after Robert died, so quiet that I could hear every creak and groan of the old wood settling, every hum of the refrigerator, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway that seemed to count down the hours of my solitude. Jennifer's presence brought life back to rooms that had been holding their breath for 4 years. She'd cook dinner sometimes, elaborate meals that reminded me she'd inherited my love of the kitchen but elevated it with techniques and ingredients I'd never heard of. Beef Burgundy with wine that cost more than we used to spend on groceries for a week. Salmon with complicated sauces that required ingredients from the gourmet section of the grocery store. She'd set the table with cloth napkins and candles, making ordinary Tuesday nights feel like celebrations, like we were dining in a fancy restaurant instead of eating in the same kitchen where I'd served countless meals of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. I want to take care of you, Mom, she'd say, refilling my wine glass with expensive Chardonnay that made my head feel light and loose. You took care of me for so long. It's my turn now. The words should have made me happy. Instead, they made me uneasy in ways I couldn't explain, like stepping on a floor that looked solid but felt slightly soft underneath. She'd sit with me in the evenings after dinner, sharing stories about her work, asking about my days at the fabric store where I worked part-time more for the social interaction than the modest paycheck. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, laughing at my stories about difficult customers who wanted impossible alterations and brides who changed their minds about their dresses 3 times before the wedding. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift in ways so subtle I almost missed them, like a boat drifting slowly away from shore while you're distracted by the pretty view. The first change I noticed was with my phone calls. I'd be in the garden pulling weeds or upstairs making beds, and I'd hear the kitchen phone ring. By the time I got there, Jennifer would be hanging up the extension, looking helpful and protective. "Oh, that was just a solicitor, Mom. Some company is trying to sell you a warranty extension on your car." I told them you weren't interested. But the caller ID had clearly shown Ruth Peterson's name, my friend from church who called every Wednesday to check on me and share gossip about the congregation. When I mentioned this, Jennifer looked genuinely confused, tilting her head in that way she'd done since childhood when she was trying to understand something. "Really? That's weird. They specifically said they were calling about your car warranty. Maybe they spoofed the number?" I read an article about how scammers are getting so sophisticated these days, using technology to make it look like they're calling from numbers you recognize. It seemed reasonable. I'd heard similar stories on the evening news about elderly people being targeted by increasingly creative scams. Jennifer was just protecting me, looking out for my best interests. But then it happened again. And again. Soon, Jennifer was answering every call that came to the house, having quiet conversations in the kitchen while I sat in the living room wondering why none of my friends ever seemed to call anymore, why I felt so isolated from the social connections that had sustained me through 4 years of widowhood. When I asked Ruth about it after church one Sunday, she looked hurt and confused. "I've tried calling you several times, Margaret. But that daughter of yours always says you're sleeping or not feeling well or can't come to the phone. I was starting to wonder if I'd done something to offend you." That's when I realized Jennifer wasn't protecting me from solicitors. She was protecting me from my own life. The medication management started next, presented as another helpful gesture from a loving daughter who was concerned about my well-being. Jennifer bought a weekly pill organizer at the pharmacy. White plastic with compartments for each day of the week, morning and evening doses clearly labeled in cheerful blue lettering. "This way you won't accidentally double dose," she explained, carefully transferring my blood pressure pills and calcium supplements into their designated slots like she was organizing jewelry in a display case. It's so easy to forget what you've taken when you're dealing with multiple medications, especially as we get older. But I'd been managing my medications just fine for years. I had a system, a routine that worked perfectly well. Pills with breakfast, calcium with dinner, everything timed and organized in my own way. "I'm not that old," I protested, watching her handle my prescription bottles like she had some authority over my body that I wasn't aware of. "I don't need my pills organized like I'm in a nursing home." "Of course you're not old, Mom," Jennifer said, her voice gentle but firm in the way she'd used when correcting me about something obvious. "But even young people use pill organizers. It's just being responsible about your health. Would you rather risk taking the wrong dose or missing a dose entirely?" She took over the task completely, refilling the organizer every Sunday night with military precision, double-checking dosages against the prescription bottles, making notes in a little notebook about what I was taking and when. She'd bring me my morning pills with my coffee, my evening pills with dinner, standing there with a patient smile until I swallowed everything. Looking back, that was when the poisoning began. When she gained complete control over what went into my body, when I stopped being the guardian of my own health. The changes in how I felt started so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. My coffee began tasting different in the mornings, bitter in a way that went beyond strong brewing, with metallic aftertastes that lingered long after I'd finished drinking and made my stomach churn with inexplicable nausea. When I mentioned it to Jennifer, she looked appropriately concerned, frowning in that way that made her look like she was taking my complaint seriously. "Maybe your taste buds are changing, Mom. That happens as we get older. Things that used to taste normal can start tasting different. Or maybe you're drinking too much caffeine. I read an article that said it can cause anxiety and digestive issues in seniors, especially if you're drinking it on an empty stomach. Seniors. When did I become a senior in my daughter's eyes? When had I stopped being just mom and become an elderly person who needed constant monitoring and managing? She bought me herbal teas instead, claiming they would be much better for my health and my digestion. Chamomile for relaxation, she said. Ginger for digestive issues. Special blends from the health food store that came in brown paper bags with handwritten labels in flowing script that looked organic and wholesome and expensive. These are so much better for you than all that caffeine, she said, steeping a cup of something that smelled like grass and earth and vaguely medicinal herbs. I researched all the ingredients. They're all natural, all beneficial for women our age. As if we were contemporaries instead of mother and daughter separated by 25 years of life experience. I drank them because refusing felt ungrateful, because Jennifer had gone to the expense and trouble of buying them specially for me, because a good mother accepts gifts from her children with grace and appreciation even when those gifts aren't quite what she would have chosen for herself. But the teas made me tired in ways that felt unnatural and overwhelming. Not the gentle sleepiness that comes at the end of a long day, but a bone-deep exhaustion that would hit me like a wall in the middle of the afternoon. I'd fall asleep in my chair after lunch, waking up hours later disoriented and groggy, my mouth dry as cotton, my head feeling like it was stuffed with wool. Sometimes I'd find myself slumped over my crossword puzzle, drooling on the newspaper, hours missing from my day like someone had stolen them while I wasn't paying attention. "You're getting such good rest," Jennifer would say, finding me confused and blinking in my living room chair, trying to remember what I'd been doing before the world went dark. "Your body must really need it. Sleep is so important for healing and recovery." Healing from what? Recovery from what? I wanted to ask. But the words felt thick in my mouth, hard to form, like my tongue had forgotten how to work properly. My morning walks became increasingly difficult to complete. Not because my legs were weak. I'd been walking the same 2-mile route through the neighborhood for 5 years, knew every crack in the sidewalk, every dog behind every fence, every house where the morning paper landed in the bushes instead of on the porch. But my energy would drain away suddenly and without warning, like someone had pulled a plug and let my strength leak out onto the pavement. I'd find myself gripping Mrs. Henderson's fence post, dizzy and nauseous, my vision blurring around the edges while the world tilted sideways. Sometimes I'd have to sit down on someone's front steps, hoping they wouldn't notice the crazy old woman who couldn't make it around the block without having some kind of episode. But I hadn't felt old before Jennifer moved in. I'd felt vital and healthy and independent. The doctor I'd been seeing for 15 years retired unexpectedly, leaving me without the medical advocate who knew my history, my personality, and my normal baseline of health. Dr. Patterson had understood that I was a worrier but not a hypochondriac, that I exercised regularly and ate well and took my medications exactly as prescribed. Jennifer helpfully found me a new physician, Dr. Martinez, fresh out of residency with bright eyes and gentle hands and absolutely no context for understanding what was normal for Margaret Collins and what represented a concerning change. "She's been having episodes," Jennifer told him during my first appointment, her voice heavy with the kind of worried daughter concern that immediately established her credibility as the reliable family member. "Fatigue, confusion, balance issues. I'm really scared she's going to fall and hurt herself." Episodes. As if I was having seizures or strokes instead of just feeling progressively sicker with each passing week. Dr. Martinez was thorough in the way young doctors often are, ordering blood tests and cognitive assessments with the careful attention of someone who wanted to be absolutely certain he wasn't missing anything important. But the test showed nothing alarming, slightly elevated kidney function, but nothing that couldn't be explained by normal aging. "Sometimes these changes happen as we get older," he explained kindly, his voice carrying the gentle condescension reserved for elderly patients who might not understand medical terminology. "We'll keep monitoring the situation." Jennifer nodded gravely, taking notes in a small spiral notebook like she was my personal medical secretary, documenting every word for future reference. "Should we be worried about cognitive decline?" she asked, her pen poised over the paper. "She's been forgetting things more often lately. Getting confused about what day it is, sometimes not remembering conversations we had just the day before." I hadn't been forgetting things any more than usual. But suddenly, sitting in that sterile examination room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of disinfectant making me nauseous, I couldn't remember if I'd taken my morning pills or what I'd had for breakfast. When I tried to protest Jennifer's characterization of my mental state, the words felt thick and clumsy in my mouth, and suddenly I couldn't remember what I'd wanted to say in the first place. The room tilted slightly and I gripped the examination table with both hands to keep from sliding off. What was happening to me? Why couldn't I think clearly anymore? Let's run some cognitive tests, Dr. Martinez said gently. Just to establish a baseline. Nothing to worry about, we're just being thorough and proactive about your care. I failed tests I should have passed easily. Simple math problems that swam before my eyes like tadpoles in a murky pond. Word recall exercises where thoughts slipped away like water through my fingers. Clock drawing tests where my hand shook so badly the numbers looked like hieroglyphics drawn by someone who'd never seen a clock before. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder supportively while I struggled to remember what day it was, what year it was, who was President of the United States. Basic information that should have been automatic but felt impossibly difficult to access. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered, her voice carrying just the right note of loving patience. "We'll figure this out together. That's what family is for." But nothing felt okay. Everything felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, like waking up in a house that looked exactly like yours but where all the furniture had been moved 3 inches to the left, creating a sense of displacement that you couldn't quite identify but couldn't ignore either. I was losing myself piece by piece and I didn't understand why. At home, Jennifer became increasingly protective in ways that felt more like imprisonment than care. She started locking my medications in a cabinet in her room, claiming it was for my own safety and well-being. "Just to be safe," she explained when I asked why I couldn't access my own pills anymore. Dr. Martinez said confusion can lead to accidental overdoses. People with cognitive issues sometimes forget they've already taken their medication and take it again. "I don't want anything to happen to you." She took my car keys after I supposedly ran a red light downtown, though I had no memory of driving anywhere that day, no memory of even leaving the house. "A witness called the police, Mom," she said, her voice heavy with concern and disappointment. "They said you seemed disoriented, like you didn't know where you were or what you were doing. What if you'd hurt someone? What if you'd hurt yourself? Had I run that light? Had I been driving erratically?" The days were becoming increasingly blurry, one bleeding into the next like watercolors in the rain. She installed security cameras in the common areas of the house. Small black devices mounted in the corners of the living room and kitchen, their red recording lights blinking like electronic eyes. "Security cameras," she explained when I questioned their necessity. "With all the break-ins in the neighborhood lately, I want to make sure we're both safe. Plus, if you have another episode, I'll be able to see what happened and get you help faster." But there hadn't been any break-ins in our neighborhood. This was Elm Street, where the biggest crime was teenagers occasionally egging houses on Halloween. The cameras felt like prison guards watching my every move. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, wondering who was studying the footage, wondering what they were analyzing, wondering if my own daughter was reviewing videos of me like I was a specimen in some kind of psychological experiment. Michael's weekly phone calls became another source of anxiety and manipulation. I'd be looking forward to hearing his voice, to having some connection with the outside world that didn't go through Jennifer's filter, but she would always answer the phone first. I could hear pieces of their conversation from the living room, Jennifer's voice carefully modulated, patient and long-suffering in the way that immediately established her as the responsible daughter dealing with a difficult situation. "She's having a rough day today," I heard her saying one Sunday afternoon. "The doctor thinks it might be early-stage dementia. He gets confused and paranoid sometimes. Yesterday she accused me of hiding her things, moving her medications around. It's really heartbreaking to watch." Paranoid. The word hit me like a physical blow. When Jennifer finally brought me the phone, Michael's voice was careful and gentle in a way that made my chest tight with unshed tears. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" "I'm fine," I said, but the words came out slurred and uncertain, like I'd been drinking even though I hadn't touched alcohol in weeks. "Jennifer's taking good care of you?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream that something was terribly wrong, that I was disappearing inside my own body, that the daughter who claimed to love me was systematically destroying me in ways I didn't understand. But Jennifer was standing right there, listening to every word with that expression of patient concern that looked so genuine to anyone who wasn't living it. "Yes," I heard myself say. She's very helpful." Helpful. Such a benign word for something so sinister. After I hung up, Jennifer sat beside me on the couch, her presence feeling both comforting and threatening in ways that made no logical sense. "I know this is scary, Mom," she said, stroking my hair like I was a sick child instead of a grown woman who had raised her and loved her and sacrificed for her. "Watching your mind change, feeling like you're losing control of your own thoughts. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm going to take care of you. We don't have to talk about unpleasant things like nursing homes or assisted living. You can stay here in your own house for as long as possible." Nursing homes. When had that become a realistic possibility we needed to discuss? "But," she continued, her voice taking on a practical tone that suggested she'd given this considerable thought, "we should probably make sure all your affairs are in order. Your will, your bank accounts, all that legal paperwork. Just in case you reach a point where you can't make those kinds of decisions anymore. Just in case I become completely incompetent. Just in case I lose my mind entirely." The next day she drove me to a lawyer's office across town. Not the firm that had handled Robert's will and our other legal affairs for 20 years, but someone new, someone who had no history with our family and no baseline for understanding my normal mental state. I don't remember much about that visit except the overwhelming sense of confusion and the feeling of signing papers while the room spun around me, Jennifer's hands steady on my back, guiding me through documents I couldn't focus on long enough to read properly. "This just gives me the ability to help you manage things if you become incapacitated," she explained on the drive home, her voice matter-of-fact. "It doesn't change anything right now. You're still in complete control of your own life and decisions." But I wasn't in control. I was a passenger in my own existence, watching helplessly as my daughter took the wheel and steered me toward destinations I hadn't chosen. Within days of signing those papers, the changes in my life became dramatic and undeniable. Jennifer opened new bank accounts in both our names and transferred most of my money into them, claiming it was for security and fraud protection. "These accounts have much better monitoring systems," she explained when I questioned the bank statements that arrived in the mail. "Your old bank didn't have the kind of security features someone your age needs to protect against scammers and identity theft." She contacted my financial advisor, a man I'd worked with for 10 years who knew my investment goals and risk tolerance, and had him redirect all my statements to her email address. "Mom gets overwhelmed by all that paperwork now," she told him during a phone call I was allowed to listen to but not participate in. "I'm helping her stay organized so nothing important gets lost or overlooked." She called my homeowner's insurance company and added herself as an additional policy holder, claiming it was necessary for emergency decision-making. "What if there's a fire or a flood and Mom is too confused to deal with the insurance company?" she asked the agent. "We need to make sure someone can make decisions quickly if there's a crisis." I was disappearing from my own life, signature by signature, phone call by phone call, while my daughter systematically erased my autonomy and independence. The physical symptoms intensified as the weeks passed, becoming impossible to ignore or rationalize away. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my skin clammy with sweat that smelled wrong, metallic and sour, like my body was rejecting something foreign. Sometimes I'd vomit for hours, my body rejecting everything I tried to keep down, leaving me weak and shaking on my bathroom floor while Jennifer held my hair back with hands that felt cold and clinical rather than comforting. "Food poisoning again," she'd say, her voice heavy with concern. "You must have eaten something that disagreed with you. Your digestive system gets more sensitive as you age, and sometimes food that would have been fine before can make you really sick now." But I was only eating what she prepared for me. Meals she made specially for my supposedly sensitive digestion, separate from her own food because of my various dietary restrictions and sensitivities. She'd bring me bland things after these episodes: crackers and clear broth, weak tea and dry toast. Foods that should have been easy to digest but somehow made me feel worse instead of better, prolonging my recovery and keeping me weak and dependent. I started hiding food in my room. Crackers from a box she didn't control, fruit I'd managed to sneak from the bowl when she wasn't watching, granola bars I'd bought weeks before she moved in and hidden in my bedroom closet. When I ate those foods I felt clearer, stronger, more like my old self. That's when I began to suspect the truth that was too horrible to fully acknowledge. The realization came slowly, then all at once, like watching the sun rise after the longest night of winter. My daughter, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd nursed through fevers and comforted through nightmares, the young woman I'd helped through college and celebrated at her wedding, was systematically poisoning me. Not with dramatic doses that would kill me quickly and raise immediate suspicions, but slowly, methodically, with carefully calculated amounts designed to make me sick, confused, and dependent. Just enough to make everyone believe I was deteriorating naturally from age and illness. Just enough to make my eventual death seem inevitable rather than orchestrated. She was stealing my life one day at a time, one dose at a time, one small betrayal at a time. I started palming the pills she gave me instead of swallowing them, hiding them under my tongue until I could spit them into tissues when she wasn't looking. I'd pour the herbal teas into my houseplants when her back was turned, pretending to drink while actually feeding poison to my poor African violets that began dying one by one. Within days of stopping the medications and teas, my head began to clear like fog lifting from a lake. The confusion receded enough for me to see the trap I'd walked into so trustingly, the web that had been spun around me so carefully I hadn't noticed the silk until I was already caught and struggling. But knowing the truth and being able to prove it were two entirely different things. And Jennifer was watching me so carefully now, monitoring my every move through those electronic eyes she'd installed, through her constant presence, through the way she studied my face when she thought I wasn't looking, searching for signs that her plan was working or that I was becoming suspicious. How do you escape from someone who has legal control over your life? How do you run when your own daughter holds all the keys to your freedom? That Tuesday night in March, the night that changed everything, Jennifer made me what she called a special dinner to celebrate my good day. She'd been monitoring my moods and energy levels like a scientist studying a lab rat, noting when I seemed more alert or when the fog lifted enough for me to function somewhat normally. "I thought we should have a nice evening together," she said, setting down a plate that looked like love incarnate, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same recipe I'd taught her when she was 12 years old and desperate to help with Sunday dinner. After all the stress and worry of the past few weeks, the meat was perfectly tender, falling apart at the touch of my fork like it had been cooking all day in love and patience. The potatoes were creamy and smooth, seasoned with rosemary from my own garden that she dried herself last fall. The carrots were glazed with honey, just the way I'd always made them for special occasions. It looked like a meal prepared with devotion. It smelled like childhood memories and family traditions. It should have been comfort food at its finest. But I knew better now. I stared at the plate, my stomach churning with the knowledge that this beautiful meal was laced with death, that each bite would carry me closer to the grave my daughter was so carefully digging for me. "I'm not very hungry tonight," I said, my voice sounding small and scared even to my own ears. "You need to eat, Mom. You've lost so much weight lately, and Dr. Martinez specifically said maintaining proper nutrition is crucial for your recovery." Her voice carried that familiar edge of frustrated patience, like a teacher dealing with a difficult student who refused to follow simple instructions. This wasn't the loving daughter anymore, the sweet girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to check under the bed for monsters. This was someone who'd been caught in her deception and was angry about it, someone whose careful plans were being threatened by my newfound awareness. But not caught by anyone who mattered. Not caught by anyone with the power to stop her. "I made this especially for you using Grandma's recipe, the one you taught me when I was little. The least you can do is try it." I picked up my fork with hands that shook like autumn leaves, took a small bite that tasted exactly as it should, rich and savory, seasoned with love and skill. She was too accomplished at this game to let the poison affect the flavor. But I could feel her watching me with the intensity of a hawk studying a mouse, making sure I swallowed, counting each bite like she was calculating dosages in her head. How much time did I have left? How many more carefully measured doses before my kidneys shut down completely, before my heart stopped beating, before she inherited everything I'd worked my entire life to build? "You know," Jennifer said conversationally, cutting her own meat with precise, deliberate strokes that reminded me of a surgeon making incisions, "calling the police yesterday was a serious mistake. It just makes you look more unstable, more paranoid." I set my fork down, unable to continue the charade of eating. My throat felt like it was closing, whether from fear or whatever chemicals she'd already managed to get into my system. "Dr. Martinez has been documenting your decline for months now," she continued, her voice taking on an almost chatty quality, like we were discussing the weather instead of my impending murder. "The confusion, the paranoia, the physical symptoms. When you die, and make no mistake, Mom, you are going to die, it's going to look completely natural." She was explaining her plan to me like a villain in a movie who couldn't resist revealing how clever she'd been, How perfectly she'd orchestrated every detail. The beauty of it is that I've been the perfect daughter throughout this whole process. Caring, attentive, sacrificing my own happiness to take care of my aging mother. When you're gone, everyone will feel sorry for me. Poor Jennifer, who did everything humanly possible but couldn't save her mother from the inevitable ravages of age and illness. I found my voice somewhere deep in my chest, rusty from disuse but still mine. I would have given you money if you'd asked. If you told me you were struggling financially. She laughed, a sound that held no warmth or humor. Some money maybe. Not enough. Not all of it. You would have lectured me about fiscal responsibility and making better choices. You would have made me feel guilty for needing help like I was some kind of failure as an adult. She took another bite, chewing thoughtfully while she continued to outline my death like she was planning a vacation. This way I get everything. The house, the investments, Dad's life insurance money that you've been hoarding, your pension benefits. And I get to keep my dignity instead of begging my mother for handouts like some kind of charity case. This wasn't my daughter talking. This was a stranger wearing my daughter's face, speaking with her voice but without any trace of the love that should exist between a mother and child. The hardest part was getting the dosing exactly right, she said, like she was sharing a particularly challenging recipe. Too much digitalis and you'd die too quickly, which would raise questions. Too little and you'd recover, which would ruin everything. But I think I've found the perfect balance. Another few weeks of carefully controlled doses, and your kidneys will fail completely. Very sad. Very natural. Very profitable. I loved you, I whispered, the words feeling like they were being torn from my soul. I know you did. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. It made this whole process so much easier. You trusted me completely, never questioned my motives, never doubted my explanations. You were the perfect victim. She reached across the table and patted my hand with fingers that felt cold and reptilian, the same gesture she'd made thousands of times when she was comforting me through difficult moments. Now finish your dinner, Mom. You need your strength for what's coming next. I looked down at the plate, at the food that would accelerate my death if I ate it, at the hands that had prepared my destruction with the same care she'd once used to make birthday cakes and Christmas cookies. This was the moment of truth. The moment where I either accepted my fate or fought back with everything I had left. I picked up the plate and threw it directly at her face. The pot roast exploded across her perfect white blouse, gravy splattering like blood, carrots flying across the room like missiles. For one frozen second she looked absolutely shocked, like she couldn't believe her docile victim had suddenly developed claws and teeth. Then her face transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage mixed with something else that made my blood run cold. Something predatory and dangerous and completely without mercy. You crazy old bitch, she screamed, lunging across the table at me with her hands extended like claws, her mask of loving daughter finally falling away to reveal the monster underneath. I ran. At 67 years old, with poison coursing through my system and terror driving my heart like a jackhammer, I ran faster than I had since I was a child, fleeing imaginary monsters in the dark. Through the living room where family photographs smiled down at me mockingly, up the stairs that creaked under my desperate footsteps, into my bedroom where I slammed the door and turned the lock with hands that shook like earthquake victims. Jennifer pounded on the other side of the door, screaming words I'd never heard come out of her mouth. Obscenities that would have earned her a bar of soap between her teeth when she was little. Threats that proved beyond any doubt that the sweet daughter I'd raised was either dead or had never existed at all. I had to get help. Real help from someone who would believe me and have the power to stop her. But who calls the police when their family is trying to kill them? Who do you trust when your own daughter has become your executioner? I barricaded myself in my bedroom with a chair wedged under the doorknob and reached for the old cell phone I'd hidden in my dresser drawer. The one Jennifer didn't know I still possessed because she'd convinced me to cancel my cellular service months earlier. House phones are more reliable for emergencies, she'd said with that concerned smile. And you don't really need to carry a phone everywhere you go at your age. But some instinct had made me keep the phone anyway, charging it secretly in my bedroom during the few hours when Jennifer left the house for errands, holding onto it like a lifeline I hoped I'd never need to use. My fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons as I dialed 911. My heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst through my ribs. The poison was still affecting my coordination, making everything feel surreal and disconnected, like I was watching this nightmare happen to someone else. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter is trying to kill me, I whispered, the words feeling strange and impossible in my mouth. She's been poisoning me for months. I'm locked in my bedroom and I think she's going to break down the door. Ma'am, what's your address? I gave it to them, speaking as quietly as I could while still being heard because I could hear Jennifer moving around downstairs, her footsteps deliberate and angry like a caged predator pacing behind bars. Officers are on their way. Can you stay on the line with me until they arrive? Yes, please. Please hurry. The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear Jennifer coming up the stairs with slow, measured steps that were somehow more terrifying than running would have been. Mom. Her voice had changed completely, taking on a sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. I know you're scared, but you're just making this so much harder on yourself. The doorknob rattled violently, then she pushed against the door itself. The chair scraped against the floor but held firm. I have a key to every room in this house, you know. You gave me all the keys when you signed those power of attorney papers. Remember that? You trusted me with everything. He was right. Of course she had a key. I'd handed her the tools of my own destruction. Ma'am, are you still there? The dispatcher asked. She's coming, I breathed into the phone. She has keys to everything. I heard the key turn in the lock with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. The chair held for another moment. Then Jennifer pushed harder and it toppled over with a crash that seemed to echo through the entire house. She stood in my doorway, her white blouse still stained with pot roast and gravy, her hair disheveled from our struggle, looking nothing like the sweet, caring daughter she'd pretended to be for so many months. This was who she really was underneath all the lies and manipulation. Someone capable of murder, someone who saw her own mother as nothing more than an obstacle between her and a bank account. Hang up the phone, Mother. The way she said mother, with such cold contempt, broke something inside me that I knew would never heal. The police are coming, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I know they are. Michael called them too after your hysterical phone call. But do you really think they're going to believe you over me? After yesterday's performance? After months of documented evidence showing your mental deterioration? She was right and we both knew it. I was the confused old woman who'd already made false accusations that had been dismissed. She was the devoted daughter dealing with her mother's tragic decline. I have evidence, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. You have pictures of my private belongings that you stole from my room. That could be considered breaking and entering, couldn't it? Or theft. What do you think that does to your credibility? She'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency, prepared responses to every possible accusation. But the 911 dispatcher was still listening on the open line. She'd heard every word of Jennifer's confession. Ma'am, this is Officer Rodriguez. We're at your front door now. Jennifer's face changed, confusion replacing confidence for the first time since this nightmare began. Ma'am, we're coming upstairs now. 2 police officers appeared in my bedroom doorway, the same young officer who'd dismissed my concerns the day before, and an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes who looked like she'd seen everything the world had to offer and wasn't easily fooled. Ladies, we received a 911 call about a domestic disturbance. My mother is having another episode, Jennifer said quickly, her voice instantly returning to that practiced tone of worried daughter. She threw her dinner at me and barricaded herself in here. I think she forgot to take her evening medications. The female officer looked directly at me. Mrs. Collins, are you injured? My daughter has been systematically poisoning me for months, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. She just admitted that she's planning to kill me for my inheritance. She told me exactly how she's been doing it. Officer Rodriguez started to sigh. I could see him preparing to deliver the same dismissive speech he'd given me before. I have the entire 911 call recorded, the female officer said sharply, cutting him off. I heard the conversation. The daughter admitted to poisoning her mother with digitalis, planning her death and calculating her inheritance. Jennifer's face went completely white. In all her careful planning, she'd forgotten about the open phone line that had broadcast her confession to the police dispatcher. That's not what I said, she stammered. She's confused, she's been having paranoid delusions and... Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us for questioning, the female officer said firmly. Mrs. Collins, we'll also need you to come to the station to make a formal statement. She can't, Jennifer said desperately, her composure cracking like ice in spring. She's not mentally competent to. She sounded plenty competent on that 911 call, Officer Rodriguez said, his tone completely different from the patronizing dismissal he'd shown me before. For the first time in months, someone was taking me seriously. Someone believed me. The next few hours passed in a blur of police stations and medical examinations and evidence collection. They drew blood that showed dangerous levels of digitalis in my system. They searched my house and found Jennifer's notebook with its meticulous documentation of dosages and symptoms. They discovered the bottles of foxglove extract hidden in her room, along with printed research about inheritance laws and life insurance policies. The district attorney explained that building a solid case would take time, but they had more than enough evidence to arrest Jennifer for attempted murder. She's been very thorough in documenting her crime, the prosecutor said grimly. That notebook is like a confession written in her own hand. Michael flew in from Oregon the next morning, his face ravaged by guilt and disbelief. I should have known, he kept repeating like a mantra. I should have listened to you, I should have seen the signs, I should have protected you. But how could he have known? Jennifer had fooled medical professionals, legal experts and law enforcement officers. Why wouldn't she fool her brother who lived 2,000 miles away? You couldn't have known, I told him, meaning it. I barely understood what was happening and I was living it every day. Jennifer was released on bail 3 days later. She came to collect her belongings under police escort, loading boxes and suitcases into her car with mechanical efficiency while I watched from my bedroom window. When she finished packing, she looked up at the window where I stood and mouthed something I couldn't quite decipher. It might have been, "I'm sorry." It might have been, "This isn't over." I suspected it was the latter. The trial consumed 8 months of my life. Jennifer's defense attorney argued that I was a confused, elderly woman who'd misunderstood her daughter's well-intentioned attempts to care for her. He claimed the digitalis came from heart medication I'd been hoarding and taking incorrectly, that I'd accidentally poisoned myself and blamed my daughter for my confusion. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The 911 recording played in court like a soundtrack to evil. Jennifer's own voice admitting to researching poisons, calculating my net worth, planning my death with the cold precision of an accountant balancing books. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, Jennifer collapsed in her chair and wept. Whether from genuine remorse or self-pity, I'll never know. She was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. 15 years for attempting to murder the woman who'd given her life. It seemed both too much and nowhere near enough. I testified at her sentencing hearing, looking my daughter in the eyes for what I knew would be the last time and telling the judge how she'd systematically destroyed not just my health, but my ability to trust, to feel safe in my own home, to believe in the fundamental goodness of family bonds. She didn't just try to kill my body, I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. She killed our relationship, our family, my faith in the people who are supposed to love me most. That's a kind of death I can never recover from. Jennifer sobbed during my testimony, the first real emotion I'd seen from her since this nightmare began. I think she finally understood what she'd lost. Not just her freedom but her mother. Forever. I'm 71 years old now, 4 years later. I still live in the same house where I raised her, though I've changed every lock and installed a security system that protects rather than surveils me. Michael visits when he can and we're slowly rebuilding our relationship, learning to trust again after betrayal. I see a therapist twice a week to process the trauma of being betrayed by someone I loved more than my own life. Some days are harder than others. Some mornings I wake up and for just a moment forget what happened, expect to smell Jennifer's coffee brewing downstairs. Expect to hear her voice calling up to ask what I want for breakfast. Then I remember. And the grief hits me again like a physical blow. I've never visited Jennifer in prison. I've never opened her letters. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds never heal. But I'm alive. Against all her planning, despite all her careful calculations, I survived my daughter's attempt to murder me. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, breathing my own air, I count that as a victory. Even if it's a victory that tastes like ashes and feels like surviving the end of the world. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I hope this story gives you strength, or at least the feeling that you're not alone. Comment where you're watching from and maybe subscribe. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard.